Hello foodies, this is Tony. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Trophy Food Experiences. Today is my last in my series of analysis of the Vancouver Michelin Guide. And this is part 4, so you can watch the other parts. In part 1, I went through all the Michelin one-star restaurants. In part 2, I went through all the Bib Gourmand restaurants. And then in part 3, I went through the remaining recommended restaurants. Very exciting for Vancouver. So here are my kind of wrap up thoughts and some things that weren't covered in some of the other videos. Firstly, no matter what you feel about the Michelin Guide or their ratings or what restaurants got recommended or not, I think overall it is a positive thing for Vancouver. The reason being is it does bring a lot of attention to Vancouver. There are some minuses, there are some things that can be concerning, but in general, it's a positive step. I think most people agree it's a positive step towards the right direction. It makes our city a culinary destination. It attracts attention. It'll probably attract tourism over the course of a period of time. So I think the Vancouver tourism industry should be applauded for bringing Michelin into Vancouver. It was a great step. So again, you can agree and disagree with the restaurants they had. I think let's address some of the restaurants that were not in the Michelin Guide. So first of all, it only included restaurants in Vancouver. So it did not include any restaurants in Richmond or Burnaby or in Whistler. Do I expect that to change in the next little while? Not next year, but I would think that in the next coming couple of years, maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, that may change. But I think what they need to get their kind of bearing straight in Vancouver and have that guide mature and get into equilibrium stage, maybe in 5 years, and then maybe they'll move to Whistler and Richmond and Burnaby and some of the other suburbs. So there was a number of restaurants, and namely restaurants like Tojo, like Le Crocodile, like Chin Chin, like Boulevard, that were not even mentioned in the guide. There were actual restaurants that I thought would get stars, namely Chiapino and also Hawksworth. So if the guide or the Michelin decided that they were not going to give stars just because people are famous, that's great. So I applaud them for that, for having that ability and sticking to their guns. But I do believe that they actually, in this situation, did give less points or discounted high-end restaurants. So these are all high-end restaurants and what we would call the traditional Michelin formal restaurants. And I think they wanted to make sure that they were more, that perhaps was their attitude or that was their marching orders from Vancouver, that it should be more representative of a more casual West Coast artsy type scene. That's what they wanted to show to the rest of the world, and they didn't want to be shown as just a fine dining, French, Italian type cuisine destination. So I think they did punish some of those restaurants, and I hope that they will, if they deserve it on their merit, that they will kind of look at those again, because it was kind of striking that many of those restaurants didn't even get into the guide or weren't rated. And they chose much newer restaurants. They also did a trend. They chose many very or quite young restaurants. That means they have not more than 5 years of history in Vancouver, and they really didn't choose many very long-term restaurants. So I was a little confused by that, because one of their criteria is consistency of food, and you can't just judge it by 4 or 5 times. I think you have to judge it over time. And I think that's because restaurants can come and go, but I think if a restaurant has staying power over the years, it does, show something. So and I'm going to go through my thoughts on each of the restaurants that were not picked. So one of the famous ones, Tojo, was not picked. I don't really have a view on that because I haven't been back for many years because it's so expensive. So if they didn't give him a star because they thought the quality of food wasn't great, that's great. But I applaud that they didn't just automatically give him a star because he's famous. So that's good, but I can't really name too much about that. I was surprised that another restaurant that's very popular called Tetsu was not recommended. But again, it's the first year, so they'll probably hopefully add more restaurants in the future. Some of the downtown restaurants that I was surprised about, Boulevard, which was on the top 100 Canada list. I like that restaurant. So it's a lot of people thought that it was very close to being a starred restaurant. I thought it should have been at least listed. I think I was surprised that Botanist was not given a star. I think it was listed as recommended. A lot of top chefs come through there, and Chef Hector there is pretty well known. I haven't been there post COVID, so I do plan to go in the next year or so to try it out again. Chin Chin on Robson Street, again, I thought that was surprising that they weren't listed. And another great Italian restaurant, Lupo, was not listed as well as Il Giardino in downtown. So again, these go back to restaurants that have long histories, that are somewhat higher end restaurants. I don't think too dressy, but more traditional Italian restaurants, and maybe they wanted to stay away from that for the first year. But again, these are all restaurants that have long histories. Chin Chin, Il Giardino, Lupo have been around for so long, and it should mean something. Another downtown restaurant, which is an institution, Highs, which again, as a steakhouse, has been around for ages. And I think that should count for something. I mean, maybe not a Michelin star, but it should count for something. Couple of other restaurants that I wanted to talk about, La Corcia and West Side. I was surprised it wasn't listed. It's also known as one of the top Italian restaurants. Again, I think they stayed clear of Italian and French restaurants. That's why they stayed away from Five Sales at the Pan Pacific, which is another. It's a good restaurant. I've done a review of it. I'll have it at the end of this. Kind of French cuisine, but really great view. So I was surprised that was not listed. Two other restaurants, Le Crocodile, I was surprised it wasn't listed, although personally I've been there and I don't think it merits a star. So I was happy again that they didn't automatically give stars to people that were famous, like Le Crocodile's chef or Provence's chef. So if that's the reason they didn't give them the star, I applaud that. Also surprised they didn't mention restaurants like Chambar, which was also quite a famous restaurant. And again, I think you have to look at things over time. Over the time period of the last 2 years, maybe they haven't got as much accolades, but over a 10-year period, they have survived. And so I think they should be given some credit for that. On the Chinese restaurant front, again, they picked some restaurants that were more newer, haven't been in the market long, and they kind of stayed away from very long historied restaurants. An example of that is San Shui on Main Street. That's had a long history, well-known restaurant, and as good as any of the other restaurants that were recommended. And also a staple on the west side of Vancouver, which is the Red Star Seafood Restaurant, which a lot of people would go to. So that's, I wouldn't maybe not give it a Michelin star, but I'm surprised it was not at least recommended, because that is a restaurant fairly well known on the west side of Vancouver. Going onwards and forwards, my intention is to visit some of these restaurants. I'm not going to go to every one of the Michelin restaurants out there, but I'm going to go to ones that interest me and provide you my views. And, I encourage everyone to go out there and try the restaurants. The other thing is that just like anything else, restaurants change over time. So if you haven't been to a restaurant for a couple of years, and honestly, there's a number of them Michelin starred restaurants haven't been to for years, that I really need to revisit. And I would say at least go to a restaurant once a year to make sure that you're updated, because lots of things change. Chefs change, managers change, menus change, and it's really, I think, unfair sometimes, and I say this from a personal point of view, unfair for me to be judging restaurants based on my personal opinions if I haven't been there for so long, because it could have changed quite a bit. Hope you've enjoyed my series of videos, including this one, and hope you'll continue to view my channel. Until next time, happy eating.